that we think is going to be useful to the listening audience, because I don't believe that the information I possess in my noggin is useful staying there. I think it needs to get out. It's not proprietary stuff. I mean, we need to share this so that people can get healthy and get better. Like I said, I want a healthy community.
Well, it's a wealth of different professional profiles. You know, the people that I've heard you bring on. I mean, I've heard really great interviews. Most recently was about play therapy. And that was such a neat breakdown, because I've never done any professional work in play therapy. I'm generally aware of it, and I've had some colleagues that I know do it. But to really hear your guest break it down and sort of explain, here's the theory behind this, and here's what we're trying to get at. And there's interviews like that all the time, which, as Nick he's joking, but there's some hard truth to this. Ours is a little bit more like goofball, but that is a great show if you're interested in psychology, if you're passionate about this as a profession, if you aspire to be a future professional, which many of our listeners actually come from the community of interns and students, and Noggin Notes, available anywhere you get podcasts. And I think the website is what?
NogginNotes.com.
Noggin Notes. It's Noggin Notes, and also on Twitter at Noggin Notes.
Yep, I think it's at the Noggin Notes.
Okay.
I think it's at the Noggin Notes. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because that means a lot. And that was, I try to keep it short too. Initially, there have been some longer conversations, but we try to keep it about 12 to 15 minutes. Just because
it's very to the point, though.
I'm ripping off Mike Rowe is what I'm doing. Mike Rowe has the Way I Heard It, which is one of the best podcasts I've ever heard. It's like eight minutes long, and he's a wordsmith, and it's great. And I love the way that he does it, because it's very, very catchy, and you can kind of listen, get a quick dose, and then move on.
It's so cool how people with podcasts, we were just talking to our engineer, and he was saying there's like so many podcasts out there now. People are calling them all the time, like, hey, we want to start one. And we read something the other day that said, like, quote, check out my podcast is the 30s and 40s equivalent of the 20s listen to my mixtape. Like, everybody has a podcast.
That's really funny.
But at least yours is a good one, and I think that it's a really interesting technique there too.
I love the app, and I wasn't even aware of the app. I'm gonna have to check that out, because I love the idea of journaling, especially things like with anger. So when I used to work with teenagers, that's one of the things that I used to do. Is I used to do that exact same thing, so that you can kind of track and identify any kind of patterns, and how is your anger and intensity, and then how quickly does it dissipate, and you can kind of look for anything that can be useful in therapy. I, of course, did it on an Excel spreadsheet, because I didn't know that technology existed, but that's awesome.
It's a great idea to put that in your pocket, and I like that it's not just an app, and it's not just something that you can use to track and use as a reference, but that it leads to resources and leads to information, especially that podcast. Because for a lot of people, that's a great coping skill to get out of their own head. It's just to have something to open up and then go, okay, I'm just going to listen to the most recent episode. And just that's 10, 15 minutes just to get them away from the place they're at, be thinking, self-inspective. I love it. That's just a tremendous idea.
And this is a nugget for people listening. The way I view what I do as a counseling professional is, I think that people just instinctively want to be happy. And so how do you get happy? You get what you want. Right. And how do you get what you want unless you know what you're looking for? So the way you get more, I guess, closer to what you want is you expand your options, you expand your view. And the way you do that is increased awareness. And my way of increasing people's awareness, there's lots of ways to increase awareness, but my way of doing it is education. I come from an education background. And so if I can teach people stuff that they don't normally know, and I can share with them what I learned in counselor school, then the expansion of awareness leads to better options. Better options leads to getting closer to what you want, and getting closer to what you want makes you happier. So
that's so neat. And
that's the intentionality
I think
behind it.
It's also interesting, as he's talking about how he bases his podcast off Mike Rowe. We base ours off Car Talk. And so everybody kind of has a mentor podcast. They're like, okay, that's the one I like, so I'm just going to do it that way. But that actually makes a lot of sense.
That does make sense.
Think about it. Yeah. So before we jump to our listener questions, we now have 3 therapists in the room, 2 good ones, and we'll find out which 2.
We're going to Rochambeau.
Yeah, we're going to Rochambeau. But before we jump into the listener mail and to the questions, I also have to ask about this role that you play in Nevada. And I'm a huge Nevada guy. We try not to make this podcast too saturated with Nevada history and Nevada need. But you are a actual public servant of Nevada. You serve in the behavioral health realm as a board of examiner, as the president of 2 of our main psychotherapeutic licensures. What made you feel like you wanted to step into that space, and what's your mission? What are you guys up to?
Okay,
how much time you got?
Yeah, no kidding. In a nutshell, and I've been I've been public about this, so this shouldn't be news. It shouldn't be shocking, and my opinions tend to be pretty unvarnished because I'm getting a little older and I'm running out of patience. But
he's the therapist on the in the rocking chair on the porch, throwing rocks,
yelling at kids to get off my lawn. But where it started was there's been a lot of frustration with our board historically, lack of responsiveness, lack of transparency, and what specifically started it was in our state we have an open meeting law that requires public bodies to post agendas and conduct their business transparently and then post meeting minutes about what transpired within a certain time frame, and that just wasn't happening. And so I started making noise, and then eventually the board turned over and some new people were appointed. We're all appointed by the governor through an application process and landed on the board and started making change. But I didn't realize how deep the rabbit hole went. 25 years worth of obfuscation and lack of attention to detail and just kind of laziness overall has led to a quagmire. And ours isn't the only board. There are some other boards catching heat for virtually the same stuff, and they're all transparent about it now. I just came Monday. I gave a presentation to the Legislative Committee on Healthcare to hold account for what we've been doing and why we are not doing what we should be doing, because collectively Nevada is 51st in almost every category you don't want to be 51st in. But specific to our profession, mental health care, mental health access, number of licensees, providers, I mean, all this stuff is just we're terrible at it. And a lot of it has to do with administrative function. We're not licensing people quickly. We've had a lot of people who haven't had the political spine to go make change and build consensus across professions with some of the other professions, and they are very different from one another, although we all call them therapists. There's marriage and family therapists, clinical professional counselors, clinical social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, which are MDs. They're a different breed altogether because they're doctors. Historically, they fought, and this is nationally. They stake out their turf, and then they snipe at each other, and we wonder why the system's broken, quote unquote, and why we have school shootings, and why people are taking their lives and getting addicted to painkillers, and it's because we as professionals are doing it to ourselves.
Right.
Yes. We're sabotaging America by being egocentric about the help that we give, and we just can't do that anymore. So that was my impetus for getting on here. And
that is such a relief to hear.
Yes. No, it really is. As people who have had to deal with these boards, we're very grateful for somebody to step forward and say, you know what, enough's enough.
Well, quite frankly, it's just not true. You reach across to your random clinical social worker, if I'm an MFT or whatever, and they don't care.
Right. Yeah. On the ground level, nobody cares.
This was all up at the top, highest level of the professional organizations nationally, invoking this fear-based mentality. And it was just terrible. So I'm just excited to put an end to it and increase flow and process and transparency and all that stuff. And I'm frankly, I mentioned earlier, I'd be happy to install drywall for a career if it meant that everybody around me was happy. And I have two kids. They're both under the age of 3. They're 5th generation. I'm 4th generation Nevadan.
Wow.
And I'm tired of being the laughing stock of the nation. I'm just sick of it. And if I can do something about that, even if it requires 30 extra hours a week of my free time, which I don't have because I have a family and a business, I'm going to do it because it's worth the next 30 years of my life not having to tolerate that anymore.
And your kids.
Right. Yeah. And I don't want them to grow up under the same lack of access to care where, they could be exposed to some violence at school or on the playground or somewhere else when that could have been totally prevented by people just getting out of each other's way.
Yeah. So, and obviously all Nevadans right now are clapping their hands. Like there's a lot of therapists listening to like, yes.
I appreciate that. I hope so.
October 1st of 2017, we had the largest mass shooting in American history, and it was right there on the Strip, the Mandalay Bay. That was a local man. He was from Mesquite, which is a town outside of Las Vegas, and this happened inside Las Vegas, and it affected everybody in the world to see this happen. And it does go back to this question of, isn't it somewhat interesting that this happened in the state that has the worst mental health resources in the country, and it's not even close.
Yeah. No, that's the other thing. It's not like we're just equally spread out on some curve. We're the bottom by a lot.
Yeah.
You look at some of the numbers of psychiatrists and psychologists especially, we're doing sort of okay per capita with therapists, like master's level therapists, but doctors, the doctorate level clinicians, the psychologists, and then the actual MD physicians are nowhere to be found, and specifically child psychiatrists.
Yes.
We are the worst by a long margin.
And actually in addictions as well.
Yeah, that's true too.
The second worst state in the nation is Georgia.
Yes.
And they have 20 per 1,000.
Twice as many.
Yeah, and we have 10. Yeah.
So
we have half as many as the other worst state in the nation. You know, and if you're coming second to Georgia in anything, you know, shame on you. I'm taking shots.
So to that point, there's some workforce development going on in our state that I would like to see nationally. I mean, if I may be so bold, I'd like Zephyr Wellness to be the SpaceX of behavioral health. I mean, that'd be nice. I don't have PayPal funding me, but Elon Musk is. I think we're watching a legend of our own time do what he does. And one of the things that he shared in an interview about a year and a half ago was that he envisions gigafactories. We have a gigafactory up north near Reno. He envisions enough gigafactories, 12 or more, across the globe, producing enough batteries so that electric cars become as commonplace or even supplant gasoline cars so that everybody can have them. And I thought, what would that look like if behavioral healthcare or healthcare in general were so available that there was never an excuse not to receive it?
Right.
I don't know what that looks like, but there's workforce development going on. I've sat on a few task forces and panels that are exploring how do we get people into the profession. And one of the obstructions is we need the jobs to be funded. And right now, a lot of what needs funding, such as case managers, community health workers, they're not reimbursable services. So we reliant upon government funding or grant funding, which of course is tax driven or it's terminal, meaning grant runs out and then there may not be the money. There's only so much benevolence to go around. And I mean, it would be nice if we could siphon off some ad money from political campaigns into healthcare.
That would be pretty cool. But in the meantime, I think if all therapists start successful podcasts, eventually they'll all be self-funded. Yeah. This is how we put a drop into the ocean of the issue of the day.
It seems the most logical solution to this.
I think it is. That's how I do the math. So our guest today is Jake Whiskerchen, man of many talents, and Nick's chomping at the bit to ask him about his brewery. All right, Nick, go ahead.
I may or may not have brought gifts for you, by the way.
Oh, yes!
That's all I wanted.
You have to fight over them because they're three different kinds.
Nick has so many questions.
How long have you been doing this?
Brewing?
Yeah.
So I got around home brewing 2007-ish, I want to say. Okay. But I didn't actually start brewing until 2010. So about 8 years.
8 years, wow.
And I just won an actual judged competition. I took a bronze in a Belgian category for a Belgian spice ale that I've made every year for Christmas annually called Clark Griswold.
Oh, nice! Oh, my gosh.
It's a quad. It's a quad.
Everybody respect what just happened.
So I'm pretty proud of that because that's the first actual judged beer that I've won. I've won a couple of People's Choice or crowd vote type things, but it's easy to wow somebody with a sample size of the newest newfangled thing. And mine happened to be a hard root beer before the hard root beer craze took over, and so people were drinking. Go, what is this? Yeah. And I was like, oh well, put your vote in the box.
Yeah.
So that was cool. That was a few years back, and then now I'm like the hipster of hard root beer. I was doing that 2 years before it was cool. But I enjoy it, and I have a draft system at home. But I stick with extract brewing. I don't care to take up to the all grain level because I think it would turn my fun little art hobby into a neurotic science because I know how I am. And before you know it, I'm dunking.
The Breaking Bad of therapists.
Putting $3,000 into a brewing system. It's like, I don't need to do that.
Do you have a label? Is your label like a name to it?
Whiskers Brewery.
That's right. I've seen the picture, the little logo.
Yeah,
what's the logo look like?
It's a puppy.
It's a puppy holding a bottle in its teeth. It was designed by a friend.
Yeah, no. And I'm gonna
We're
put
on
up
Untapped.
on our
You can check in your beers.
Yes, it's fun, and I'll put up a picture on our Twitter of your tap heads. They're all broken baseball bats. I showed you this, didn't I?
You did show me
that. They're all these
That's
broken
really
baseball
cool.
bats and like a baseball one. And it's
I
pretty
played
funny.
hardball for a number of years and finally hung up my spikes when my body didn't work anymore. But I used the bats. I just sawed them off and installed a little 3/8 inch threaded thing to screw onto the tab.
That is great.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
And I love the names that you come up with for things. I wish
the Clark Griswold.
Yeah,